Greetings, brother, and welcome back around the fire. Ryan Schwartz here with Eric Amin. And as always, it is a pleasure and an honor to host you for this transformative conversation. Being the last one in this particular series, we endeavored to illuminate the topic of self-mastery, this big, vast topic, and make that one that is practical, palpable, and one that you can begin to apply not just day by day, but moment by moment, right? A constant practice of self-observation, self-correction, and the self-mastery that emerges from both these two aspects. So this is going to be a topic. It's going to be the juiciest one that I've wanted to share for a while. And I believe that if heated in the remedial section and compounded day by day, moment by moment, this truly can be life-changing in the most incredible ways for yourself and those you are blessed to share your life and kingdom with. With that, I am in, and I will pass it over to Eric to officially open this space.
All right. Thanks, Ryan, and welcome, brother, for being here. As always, we're going to come inward and close our eyes, breathe into our body, gathering our awareness with each inhale and bringing it down into our midline, our central column. And as we do each exhale, we release a little tension, releasing any excess mental energy, any physical tension, anything keeping us from being fully present here around the fire. We ask for assistance in surrounding our space with energetic protection, keeping out anything and everything that is not in alignment with the highest and best good of both Ryan, myself, and any man participating with and engaging with this recording in any way. We ask that the hardware devices, the electronic frequencies that are used to transmit and store this transmission also be encrypted and protected so that only that which is in alignment, which is in the highest alignment with each man engaging in this, be able to enter into this space. We take a moment to honor all of our ancestors who have gone before us, all of our descendants who will stand upon our shoulders when we are gone, all of the masters, teachers, guides, angels, saints, and all those who support the manifestation of the dream we had for ourselves before we were born. We honor the directions of the north, south, east, and west, Father Sky above, Mother Earth below, and the divine spark within and without. With that, brother, I ask you to just take a couple more deep breaths into your body, connecting inward with your heart. And as we move through this private discussion, just allow yourself to settle into anything that's true for you, anything that's right and perfect for you to connect with at this time, and just set the intention that anything and everything that is not in alignment with your highest and best good just be kept on your periphery. And with that, we open our space for our discussion around the fire.
Beautiful. Because it's such a big term, I would love for us to set the conceptual framework for what we would define as self-mastery. How does one know when they are operating or endeavoring towards self-mastery, right? What are the clear signposts that one is on a path towards self-mastery and not just one of a loud, big, massive action disguising as such? And I would love for you to illuminate what that means to you.
Yeah, that's a great question and a good way to start. For me, it's the realization of your highest potential. That is the mastery at the end of the path. And really, what we're talking about here is the path itself, the pathway to the realization of your highest potential.
Mm.
And, depending on how you orient yourself and your spirituality and your beliefs, that may mean different things to you. For me, that means as long as I'm still here in a body, I have work to do. There are things that I can improve. And, one of the interesting things related to that a lot of people new to this work experience is the idea of doing some work and then being done doing the work,
Mm.
and that's a fallacy that those same people will come to know as they stay in the work, uh, or not. Some people hang on to that and they use that as an excuse to stop.
Mm.
For me, for the men and women I work with, and for our Sacred Men's Council, we acknowledge that the pathway to that fulfillment of our highest potential is the path of self-mastery.
Right. You said something that resonated there, right? This fallacy of the false peak, right? The fallacy of the work being done, right? When in truth, it is likely more just a temporary resting place where you can
Mm-hmm.
kind of recalibrate and essentially kind of assimilate and metastasize all the lessons and all the journey you've already had, right? You'll set up camp at a certain plateau, enjoy it for a moment, and then endeavor further. And we've spoken in the past about the seductive lure of a conclusion, right? Of a final endpoint where the work is done. And perhaps that is still one element that blocks or impedes our viewpoint of accurate self observation. And I would love to delve deeper into the factors you've experienced and perceived in the work you do of what else limits men's ability to self perceive and self observe accurately and consistently.
Yeah. I think it's helpful to acknowledge that as human beings, we're hardwired to seek safety and comfort. We aren't, our brain isn't automatically oriented to seeking out challenges to overcome, to expand into, and edges to work with.
Hmm.
We seek comfort, we seek ease by our nature.
Right.
And so right away, we're working against the systems that are on board and encoded into us that want us to find the easiest path,
Hmm.
right? And self mastery isn't necessarily the easiest path. Could be, but in most cases, it involves work. It involves going through challenges that facilitate the expansion of your
Mm-hmm.
consciousness. They facilitates the death of old parts of you, of limiting beliefs, old outdated paradigms, old structures. And my belief is that's what life is all about. That's why we're here in a
Hmm.
body on the earth, is to realize our highest potential. So some of the things that get in the way of that, one, and the biggest one to mention right away, is our innate desire to seek comfort.
Hmm.
And that means that if the situation we are in is not comfortable, even people in the world of self growth, actually, especially those people often will seek the solution instead of seeing where they are. In fact, they'll
Hmm.
skip the self observation step and they'll go right to like reading all the books. This is
Right.
really common. A lot of men that I've worked with have, really intelligent men have read all of, the classic works in the men's work space, and
Mm-hmm.
yet are still repeating the same patterns over and over again. And that's
Mm-hmm.
because there's so much going on, and there's so much, they're taking their bandwidth and they're putting it out there, and they're grabbing knowledge, and almost like they're seeking and grasping for a life vest,
Right.
or what's that ring they toss out, if you're out in the ocean, life preserver or something like that,
Mm-hmm.
instead of just taking inventory of where exactly they are. And often that happens because their capacity to be with discomfort is very
Mm.
low,
Right.
and that lack of capacity is what creates a need to look somewhere else. I don't want to
Mm-hmm.
look inside or look where I'm at because it hurts too bad. So I'm going to instead read this book and listen to this podcast
Mm-hmm.
and do this guided meditation.
The irony of what you're describing, right, is that for most, they wouldn't even self diagnose as being low capacity to self observe, right? And I believe that that is one of the fallacies of quote unquote the path of personal development or even spiritual growth, that the ego, being as clever as it is, wishes to idealize itself as something, right? And self observing in ways that we are still prone to err, right? Still in ways that we are not yet refined or perfected, runs counter to this idealized image that we're here, right? It wants to be able to find itself on a you are here map. And the place it wants to find itself is usually pretty high on the realized, awakened, close to
Mm-hmm.
perfection. So when we encounter, or when a practice of self observation would indicate that an aspect of ourselves, an aspect of our identities, a fragment of our ego, some shadow that has been left unexamined is still prone to embodying and expressing behaviors, thoughts, beliefs, or actions that where we are on the map wants nothing to do with, that becomes very difficult to want to self observe.
Yeah, absolutely.
Hmm.
Um, that is a lot of the whole industry, really. I mean, that goes into spiritual materialism as well,
Mm-hmm.
of this idea. We look at the plant medicine community, and there's so much beauty in there. And, in recent years, it's become, something that's become more mainstream. And with that comes the spiritual bypassing that comes with that. Like oh, I'm generally a dick who's not self-aware, but I have done, I just
Mm-hmm.
got back from Peru, and let me write you a book about the experience I had, you
Mm-hmm.
know. Um, but my general day-to-day demeanor is treating people like shit, including myself, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Um, that that discomfort of, in that case, in that example, that discomfort of being able to be with, hey, am I a dick? Is that actually how I'm being? And where am I being a dick?
Mm.
Like, one thing that comes to mind is a lot of the gratitude style journals that are out there. And we write, you write the goal of how you want to show up. And then you write, like, what are 3 ways that I did X, and usually X is the ideal version,
Mm-hmm.
right? And it skips over what else happened,
Mm-hmm.
like, it's only where did I meet expectation,
Right.
not where did I show up the rest of the day.
Mm.
And so there's this skipping out on opportunity, right? Because when we get a real sense of where we are, that's the only time we can actually make corrections to our weaknesses,
Mm-hmm.
not only amplify our strengths. Because
Right.
for a lot of people, the weaknesses get buried in the shadow, and they keep sabotaging over and over and over. And there's no book, there's no program, there's no thing that's going to get you past the work of looking at that weakness.
Right. So, what are the conditions that would strengthen one's ability and even desire to self observe more accurately, right? And what comes to mind for me right off the bat is anyone who has experienced some form of liberating breakthrough in their lives, right? A point of no return. Usually there has been a holy fuck moment, right? Of coming into clarity of a form of self observation of that was there, like,
Mm-hmm.
wow, right? And in knowing and in observing that, now you have a chance to not just take massive action, but massive corrective action, right? And it becomes a far more effective action because it is inclusive of the totality of who you are, right? Not just taking actions on top of this impenetrable surface that you haven't endeavored to drill deeper into. So there is a bit of that thrill of self discovery when you're really in it, right? There is a lot of energy that is liberated when you could pierce through that layer and self observe. And in my experience, it is exciting as fuck. And the reward of that is far greater than guarding some precious idealized image of who I want to be, right? And who I want to project. And I would love your take and experience on what would strengthen one's desire, will, or capacity to self observe.
Yeah, well, first off, I want to just echo your observation of, the potential expansion, enlightenment, and really just excitement around those discoveries,
Mm-hmm.
right? And there are countless times, in men's groups where a man is doing the work and he has this moment of where he just all of a sudden sees what he didn't see.
Mm-hmm.
And usually what follows is, oh, fuck.
Right.
Like,
Yeah.
oh man, whoa, shit. Like it's this like sometimes it can be uplifting right away, or sometimes it's like a reality check,
Mm-hmm.
right? No matter what, often what comes with it is like a realization of like, wow, I wasn't even seeing that thing.
Mm-hmm.
Now, to create the, can you still hear me okay?
Mm-hmm.
To create the conditions to where the situation is ripe for that to happen, it often involves a slowing down, at least for a certain amount of moments, right? Because what I've experienced in my own life is when I start to go into like, oh, I don't like where I am right now. Oh, I don't like this at all. There's a part of me that automatically wants to start scrambling for solutions.
Mm.
And that takes us to the circumstance we were talking about earlier, where there's so much reaching out, like
Right.
this coaching program, this book, this guided meditation. There's so much reaching outward that it actually becomes a false, it actually becomes a type of escapism,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because I'm able to focus everything on a potential solution and I get to daydream about that potential solution working for me.
Mm.
But what happens is if we don't sit with ourself long enough to get accurate feedback from our heart, from what's going on inside, then we're acting on false pretenses typically, meaning
Mm-hmm.
like we don't actually know what the problem is, but we're looking for a solution.
Right.
And we're just hoping that we get lucky because we've heard that this person who's sort of similar to me
Mm-hmm.
had a positive experience with this solution or that solution. And so the conditions involve slowing down and usually doing nothing,
Right.
like creating a lack of distraction,
Mm-hmm.
including all of the spiritual tools and all of the practices that you have.
Right. So this is something we were riffing on a little bit before hitting record, right? How the capacity for self-observation and slowing down amidst the agony and the charge of being in a problem, right, is an embodiment practice, right? How much truth can you hold? How much truth can you allow yourself to observe? How strong of a shot of truth can you actually take in,
Mm.
right? And we were kind of, enjoying the playful metaphor, right? Of, can you take a wine cooler truth, or could you take a Jack Daniels truth, or, all the way up the spectrum?
Hmm.
And it very much is a process of building capacity, right? And self observation is strengthened as you cultivate the capacity to self observe. For me, it's not a binary, you are observing or you are not observing.
Hmm.
Everyone is in a state of some degree of observation, right? Even if it's through a very narrow, quick lens that doesn't really penetrate through a single layer, right?
Hmm.
All the way to the full spectrum where you are almost completely transparent to yourself with full capacity to view, experience, and feel all that is revealed through that penetrating sight. So I would love to have a bit of a conversation of what you would view to be a bit of the gradual steps in building one's capacity to self observe with greater depth and greater clarity.
Yeah, that's a great angle to look at. You know, there's the strengthening of our capacity, and then there's the practice of observing. And sometimes they cross over, and not always. And my favorite type of strengthening practice is qigong.
Mm-hmm.
For me, it's something that incorporates the body. It brings a lot of body and energy awareness.
Mm-hmm.
It brings the breath in and synchronizes your breath, energy, and body together, which is a really powerful combination. And it starts to illuminate stagnancy and things where energy isn't flowing freely. So it builds in a sensitivity. In fact, there's a qigong teacher, a master teacher, Gary Garipoli, and he's written a bunch of beautiful books on qigong. But he calls um, qigong sensitivity training. Like,
Mm-hmm.
you are learning to become more sensitivity, and as you become more sensitive, you start to understand the impacts of certain inputs on you from a mental, emotional, physical, and energetic standpoint. And when you become more aware of them
Mm-hmm.
through self-observation, you start to be able to navigate reality in a much more masterful way. But it starts with cultivating your capacity to sense,
Right.
right? Without that, that's like, if we look at it from a more scientific perspective, that's like having better instruments to measure with.
Right.
And we're able to upgrade our instruments with something like Qigong,
Mm-hmm.
a practice that brings our awareness to our capacity to sense and feel.
Mm.
So Qigong is great at doing that. Then we move into actual self-observation practices. And when you've cultivated your ability to do that, it could be as simple as, right now, closing your eyes, taking a breath, and scanning down through your body with your awareness, scanning your thoughts, scanning your emotions, and really getting a sense of where you are. Sensitivity, like sensations in the body, thoughts, emotions, and energy.
Mm.
Those are four powerful places to check in right away. So you could do that through journaling. You could do that through just a mental note you make with yourself. You could do it through an accountability partner, but
Right.
that's a really basic place you could start.
The self honesty as you become more sensitive becomes a very vital skill in the totality of self observation. I'll give you one example, right? You may strengthen your system, right? You might strengthen your capacity to sense and feel and reveal. And the thoughts that are observed may be so far from how you would view yourself, right? You may uncover thoughts that are rooted in ill intent, right? Negative intent, aggression, anger, victimhood, that are so far from how you would self describe and self define that the next skill in accurate self observation becomes in your willingness to actually see that and own that, take ownership of those still being there. And I'll give an example from my own life. It was recent. It was as recent as about a year and a half ago, when I was in this state of experiencing these thoughts of not wanting to grow my business, right? Of just kind of wanting to even burn it all to the ground, right? And I was self-observing, where are these thoughts coming from? What is driving this motive? What is driving this intent? And I uncovered through my own observation what I later deemed being a financial kamikaze pilot, right? Where I was so angry, right, in what I had perceived to be a lack of contribution and participation from my partner, that I endeavored, or at least that aspect of me endeavored, to weaponize the part that I still had control over, right? And the thoughts associated with it were fucking awful, right? Or at least that would be one way to judge them, right? It would be, I'm going to weaponize my own generativity, right? My own well-beingness, just out of an act of spite or vengefulness, right? And these thoughts never became solid actions, right? They became kind of dispersed, but they would rob me of my energy and my power while operating there. And it took me a while to be willing to observe them, right? To even allow them to express their voice fully, because the moment they would start having a voice, I was so resistant to even accepting that that would even be part of who I am right now at this stage of my life, right? So my own capacity to self-observe those types of thoughts of ill intent, when I would otherwise describe myself as almost unconditionally benevolent and of positive intent, right? Which is, once again, a bit of a spiritual ego thing, limited my capacity. So what made that possible to self-observe and ultimately self-correct was a willingness to see it without self-judgment, right? Without that shame that would typically accompany it, with more of a curiosity and an adventurous spirit that actually said, bring it on. I want to see the weirdest, strangest, gnarliest creatures I could find in these chasms, right? And make that almost the goal, right? To find the darkest of the dark, right? To not hide away from it, but to welcome it and to find a sense of courage and even excitement in doing so. And to me, once you've developed that sensitivity, that willingness to observe all, right, with that courage, with that adventurous spirit, becomes a pretty vital skill.
Yeah, that's a beautiful share, and I think it highlights this thing that when we don't practice self-observation, our body does this thing where when we have a weakness somewhere in the body compensates for the weakness. And often that compensation sets off a chain reaction through the body, creating pain at a site that isn't actually the origin of the pain. So, for example, when I was 16, I had a lot of back pain, like in one side of my back. Went to different chiropractors, finally went to a chiropractor that found that the arch in one of my feet was weak. And we did some work to strengthen that arch, immediately fixed my back.
Mm.
And so what happens often when we're not self-observing is, let's say there's a thought that pops up a few times. Often that thought, if it's a weaker thought, like it creates a vulnerability. Let's say, for example, Ryan and I always use the example, red clowns, like let's say I'm always afraid of red clowns showing up when I'm out, So this thought pops up. Eventually, this habitual thought will most likely create either A, an emotion, or B, a sensation, or C, an energetic effect. It will impact them. And so what happens is sometimes, and this is my experience with myself and often working with other men, is sometimes it takes 2 to 3 layers of that chain reaction until we spot it.
Mm.
And if we're not practicing regularly, it can look like the problem is this. Could look like, oh, when I'm out at night, I start to get contracted and my body starts to do X, Y, and Z. Because I'm not seeing that there's a chain reaction happening from my energy to the sensations in my body, to my emotions, to my thoughts that originated in a thought. So there's a leading weakness that happens somewhere that creates a chain reaction of effects on the back end. When we are practicing self-observation regularly, we can spot it quickly, what's going on, like in your example you just gave. But what do you think, just to play out a fictitious scenario, what do you think could have happened if you didn't spot that, Ryan, and you let that continue to play out?
Yeah, at the very least, there would have been a compromised state, right? A compromised state where part of me was endeavoring to provide for my family and myself and grow and be in enjoyment, right? While another part of me that was being resisted in my observation of it was trying to sabotage the whole thing, right? That had such a narrow vision and consciousness, right? It was hell bent on this destruction, right? And when a
Mm-hmm.
destructive force is unchecked, unobserved, and allowed to continue to operate with energy that is being fed to it, at the very minimum, we are delayed and compromised in our expression of what we would call self mastery, right? Living
Mm-hmm.
a life that is meeting our fullest potential. We can't bridge into that full potential while still being compromised and dispersed towards quote unquote lower motives. So at the very least, it would have been that. At worst, right, it could have been fed, right, more energy to a point where it has a disproportionate amount of influence over the more virtuous stance. And that's where we would see the more observable negative effects,
Mm-hmm.
right? But the point I want to make on that is you don't need to wait until there is observable devastation. In fact, you would be advised not to wait until there is observable devastation. You would be wise instead to see where your energy is being compromised and dispersed to these conflicting motives, to these thoughts, to these energies that are still misaligned, to these identities that have yet to be fully matured. Because in reclaiming energy from those aspects and self correcting, educating them, and involving them in the process of self mastery, that is where you become so much more effective, right, in navigating that ship towards those coordinates that you have chosen to be most fruitful.
Yeah, that's a great piece, and really, I think, as a transition into remedial, um, catching these things early by cultivating your capacity to observe is absolutely essential in navigating your path of self mastery. In that example Ryan shared, he was able to spot a lack of congruency in the momentum that was happening, because we all have these different parts of us. And when there's a lack of alignment in momentum and energetic focus, some of the momentum is going this way, some is going this way, and it at the very least slows down our progress.
Mm-hmm.
But when we can get all the energy flowing in the same direction toward the target, toward our inner vision, toward our goal, then we can navigate much more powerfully. So a lot of this work is in spotting where is my momentum not headed in the direction that I'm aiming.
Mm-hmm.
And when we can spot that, or we can spot a weakness that's creating discordance, we can come in and address that problematic area and get everything flowing in the right direction again.
Right. Yeah. And then in being willing to be with that weakness, right, which
Mm-hmm.
is one of the topics of this conversation, right? Is like if you're running a marathon, you may not want to stop to take the pebbles out of your shoe, right? It might feel like it is a waste of time, a waste of effort, and you got to just keep pushing and running along, right? And of course, those pebbles over multiple miles or tens of miles become a far bigger problem, right? At the very least, they're going to slow you down. At worst, you might not even complete the race, right? If you have massive lesions in your foot. So the same is true here, right? Where you observe weakness, and weakness will present itself in some way, shape, or form, right? A reaction you have towards a specific conversation, right? A fear in taking an action. The more we can actually take that extra moment, as Eric was mentioning, right, to slow down, to not bulldoze through and just take the next massive action on top of it, but to slow down and perceive and open and sensitize and dare look at what is being presented. That's where we can enter that path of self-mastery, right, consistently and move a lot faster because of it.
Yeah, absolutely. So, what would you recommend, Ryan, to a man who is listening and he's starting to become aware that he does some of these things. He does some of the bulldozing paths, and he's leaning into seeking the solution before even becoming aware of the weakness or the problem.
Mm. In simplest terms, it is getting comfortable in the experience, the potential cringe, the potential squirm of the problem itself, right? A longer term practice, of course, Qigong or other embodiment and strengthening practices over time. And almost immediately, I believe making that shift towards from self shame and self judgment to the inner adventure, right? You can kind of assume that archetype in those moments and not just be curious, but really desiring to see what is there, right? And in assuming that stance, you kind of take a little bit of a distance, right? You stop taking what is observed so personally, right? And it becomes less fatal to some well crafted image of who you believe yourself to be. So that would be my simple remedial practice in conjunction or in complement with more longer term strengthening practices.
Yeah, I think that's a great place to start. And, you know, focusing on something to strengthen your capacity to sense, a regular practice of checking in with your thoughts, your sensations, your emotions, and your energy. And then on the correction side, you don't have to totally solve the quote unquote problem at first. All you have to do is identify what small action, what small achievable action will be a course correction to get the
Mm-hmm.
momentum back directed at the target.
Right.
And that's an area of sabotage in and of itself for a lot of men, is picking a corrective action that's massive. Now, we're not telling you to shy away from massive action, and we are also sharing the piece around being mindful that the part of you that wants to keep you where you are and keep you from changing is really good at what it does. And one tool it sometimes uses is creating a goal that's unachievable
Mm.
or likely to be unachievable, so that when you don't immediately succeed at it, you give up altogether,
Mm-hmm.
versus creating momentum with small corrective action. Self mastery isn't isn't a sprint, it's a marathon, and we're all we have to do is make small corrections and keep checking in. What are the effects of that small correction? You know, what is my energy doing now? What are my thoughts doing now? Coming back to yourself, measuring, and then taking another
Mm.
corrective action.
Yeah, that is the path of self mastery, which in my view is one of consistent refinement, right?
Yeah.
Each corrective action reshuffles the deck just a little bit, right? And you have a new data set to observe, and your observation is strengthened as that data set changes as well, right? So it is a constant practice of refinement. And one thing that often gets missed when you take that massive action is, I call it kind of the snow globe effect, right? You shake things up so much that they become unrecognizable, right? And you feel like you've left everything else behind, right? Leave everything behind, go to Bali, right?
Mhm.
The deck is too shuffled and too bypassed to really gain the fruit of what was actually observed, refined, and mastered. So
Yeah.
there is a place for bold action, right? And we've spoken about this before. When you or when one is in a state of total inaction, total apathy, total resignation, depression, right? Moving, right? If you are drowning, flapping your arms, right, may be more effective than sinking.
Hmm.
And for most, self mastery is going to be a more consistent, perhaps less loud practice, and more one where you get to experience the inner victory every day rather than the loud public one.
Yeah. Well said.
Cool. I feel complete in that. How about yourself?
Yeah, I feel complete in that as well.
Beautiful. Let's close it.
All right. Okay, men, coming back into your body, using your breath to anchor your awareness into your lower abdomen. At this time, we ask for assistance in opening all the exit portals, allowing any outdated beliefs, stories, paradigms, structures, or anything that no longer serves your highest and best good to be effortlessly cleared from the body, insulating ourselves so that we can integrate what is right and perfect for us to integrate in right and perfect timing. We dedicate our transmission today to the upliftment of suffering and confusion for all sentient beings. And at this time, we seal up the space, sealing, 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 guarding, 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 protecting, protecting, protecting. It is sealed, it is finished, it is done, so it is, and so be it.